Unconditional. This book is dedicated to a dear friend and lover who entered my world, bringing hope and joy. As many search for this kind of peace, I've brought my story to life for you to read and enjoy. Life is not easy and is filled with surprises, but know that you are not alone and that anything is possible. Chapter 1, Samantha's Struggles. The early morning darkness was broken only by the soft hum of the alarm clock. Samantha's hand hovered over the snooze button, tempted to delay the inevitable start of another long day. But the quiet stirrings in the crib at the foot of the bed reminded her there was no time to waste. Emily, her 2-year-old daughter, shifted in her sleep, her tiny hands clutching her favorite blanket. Samantha's heart softened at the sight. For all the challenges in her life, Emily was the one thing that made it all worth it. She moved carefully, sliding out of bed to avoid disturbing her daughter. The house was still, but Samantha's mind was already racing. Life with Chad had been rocky lately, and the tension in their home was impossible to ignore. They'd been living together since before Emily was born. Chad had bought the house while she was pregnant, proudly presenting it as their fresh start, a home where they could raise their family. At the time, it had felt like a promise of something better. This past summer, when Chad proposed, Samantha had allowed herself to believe they could still make things work. She had said yes, hopeful that their engagement would mark the beginning of a stronger chapter, but now, only months later, her hope felt increasingly fragile, like a house built on sand. As she shuffled toward the bathroom, the sound of heavy footsteps startled her. Chad was awake. The knot in her stomach tightened as his boots thudded against the floor, each step growing louder until he appeared in the doorway. His face was tense, his expression dark with anger. "Been cheating on me, haven't you?" he demanded, his voice sharp, and the words stopped Samantha in her tracks. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The question was so out of nowhere, so utterly unfounded that it left her stunned. "You heard me?" Chad spat, stepping closer. His eyes narrowed as he continued. "Don't act innocent, I know you've been seeing someone else." Her mind raced. Where was this coming from? Between caring for Emily, working odd shifts, and barely holding everything together, when would she even have the time to do what he was accusing her of? "Chad, I haven't," she began, but he interrupted. "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "I've seen the way you act. The sneaking around, the late nights. You think I'm stupid?" Samantha felt her chest tighten. Sneaking around? Late nights? She barely had time to take a shower without Emily needing something, let alone meet anyone else. But before she could defend herself, Chad delivered the next blow. "I've been seeing someone else," he said coldly, his tone devoid of remorse. "And it's your fault. You made me do this." Her breath caught in her throat as the words sank in. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he just said. "What?" she whispered again, her voice trembling. Her first instinct was disbelief he couldn't mean it, but the hardness in his eyes told her otherwise. "You heard me," he repeated, folding his arms across his chest. "If you'd been better, done more, this wouldn't have happened." The weight of his words hit her like a tidal wave. Samantha's mind raced back over the past 2 years. The sleepless nights with a newborn, the juggling of shifts to make sure Emily was always cared for, the countless compromises she had made to keep their little family together. And more recently, the silent prayers she had whispered every night, hoping their relationship would heal. She had clung to the idea that getting engaged meant they were working towards something stronger, that trying for another baby might bring them closer after the pain of her miscarriage. Now, all of those efforts felt like a cruel joke. "We were supposed to be working on us," Samantha said, her voice breaking. "We were trying for another child, Chad. How could you do this?" Chad scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You think I wanted that? Another kid? I can barely handle this," he said, motioning toward the crib where Emily still slept soundly. "You pushed and pushed, and now look where we are." Samantha's shock began to give way to anger. "Don't you dare blame me for your choices," she said, her voice rising. "You cheated because you wanted to, not because of me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. For the first time, Chad looked away, unable to meet her eyes. But there was no apology, no sign of regret, only silence. Samantha turned toward her dresser, grabbing her bag with shaking hands. Her heart felt as though it had been shattered into a million pieces, but she refused to let him see how deeply he had hurt her. She needed to stay strong for herself and for Emily. "I'll forgive you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Not for you, but because it's what God would want, but I won't do this again." Without another word, she walked toward the door. She paused only briefly, glancing back at Emily. The toddler stirred slightly but didn't wake, her peaceful face a sharp contrast to the turmoil in Samantha's heart. She stood there for a moment, drawing strength from the sight of her daughter. As she stepped into the hallway, Samantha felt a mix of fear and determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she couldn't stay in this toxic cycle. Emily deserved better, and for the first time, Samantha realized she did too. The drive to work was a blur of tears and questions. Samantha gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she fought to steady her trembling hands. Why had Chad done this? Why had he turned on her so completely? The memories of his cold, dismissive words replayed in her mind like a broken record, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had spent so long convincing herself that she could fix things, that her love could heal the wounds in their relationship. If she just tried hard enough, if she sacrificed enough, surely Chad would see her worth and become the man she had fallen in love with. But now, she saw the truth for what it was. Chad had chosen this. His betrayals, his cruelty, they weren't her fault. He had made these decisions, and no amount of love or effort on her part could change that. The realization both shattered her and set her free. That evening, after putting Emily to bed, Samantha sat alone in the room she had moved into weeks earlier. Her hand rested on her growing belly, a silent reminder of the new life she carried. Audrey, the baby she had once hoped would bring her and Chad closer. Now the pregnancy felt like a lifeline, a reason to keep going even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. But the question loomed in her mind: could she raise 2 children in a house filled with such toxicity? Chad's footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder until he appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his expression smug. "We need to talk," he said flatly. Samantha's heart pounded, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "What is it now, Chad?" He crossed his arms, his tone dripping with disdain. "I want to bring other women home." "But I can't do that with you here?" The words hit her like a slap, but instead of tears or anger, a strange calm settled over her. She stared at him for a long moment, letting his cruelty sink in. Then, something inside her shifted. The part of her that had been holding on, hoping for change, finally let go. "You want to bring other women here?" she said quietly, her voice steady. "Then you can have the house, Chad. I'm done." Her words caught him off guard. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, I'm done," Samantha said, rising to her feet. She placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling a surge of strength she didn't know she had. "I'm done with this relationship, with the lies, with the way you treat me. You've made it clear that you don't care about me or our family, and I'm finally accepting it. I won't fight for something that isn't worth saving." Chad scoffed, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Good luck out there, Sam. You're going to fail without me." She shook her head, a small, bitter smile tugging at her lips. "I've been failing because of you. Leaving is the best thing I can do for myself and for Emily and for Audrey." Her voice grew firmer as she continued. "You don't get to control me anymore. I'm leaving, Chad. You can bring whoever you want into this house, but we won't be here to see it." He opened his mouth to respond, but Samantha didn't wait to hear it. She walked past him, her back straight and her head held high. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of strength she thought she had lost. The next day, Samantha confided in her great-aunt Janet, pouring out the story of Chad's betrayal and the toxic life she had been enduring. Janet listened without judgment, her face soft with understanding. When Samantha finally finished, Janet reached over and squeezed her hand. "You and the girls are coming to stay with me. You'll always have a place in my home." The relief Samantha felt was overwhelming, like a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had finally been lifted. For the first time in months, she saw a glimmer of a future free from Chad's manipulation and cruelty. Packing up her things was bittersweet. Samantha moved through the house, gathering what little she could take with her. Each room was a reminder of love lost and dreams that would never come true. The nursery she had decorated for Emily with such excitement now felt like a ghost of happier times. The kitchen where she had cooked meals, imagining a family that now felt like a distant dream. The living room where the arguments had started, each one chipping away at the foundation of their relationship. As she loaded the car, Emily's favorite stuffed animals peeked out of one of the boxes. their soft faces a reminder of the innocent Samantha was determined to protect. She placed her hand on her belly again, silently promising Audrey the same. She took one last look at the house as the sun began to set. It wasn't a home anymore, just a place where she had tried and failed to make something beautiful out of something broken. Janet's modest home was a sanctuary. The moment Samantha stepped inside, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Janet welcomed her with open arms, her warm smile a balm to Samantha's weary soul. That night, as Samantha tucked Emily into bed, she felt a flicker of hope. She whispered to Audrey, silently vowing that her daughters would grow up in a home filled with love and safety. For weeks, Samantha worked to rebuild herself, one small step at a time. She grieved not just for the relationship she had lost, but for the woman she used to be, the one who had believed in happily ever afters. But each day brought a little more strength, a little more clarity. One morning as dawn broke over Janet's small garden, Samantha stood by the window and whispered a silent prayer. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she believed it could be better. She was free now, free to find her own way, free to heal, and free to give Emily and Audrey the life they deserved. And though the journey ahead would be challenging, Samantha knew she was ready to face it.